Well, we just last week preached a text that is very familiar to people. It's Peter's great confession. And he answers that question, who is Jesus? You know, Jesus said, who do people say that I am? Some said John the Baptist, some Elijah, some a great prophet. And Jesus really hits the point. Who do you say that I am? And Peter responds, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You are the Christ had such powerful meaning to them because they basically knew that word Christ is also in the Hebrew Messiah, the one that they had been waiting for, that promised one, the returning great king. And so in their minds and their thoughts, the emphasis was on Jesus' power and authority, which they had seen in the healings and his teaching. But now it had an expectation of something bigger, something grander, and they were going to be swept along with it. And they were excited. But as we hear in the text, that Jesus is on the way. And what happens is that Jesus answers a question that's not asked. What must Jesus do? And so Jesus says that he is going to have to be beaten. He's going to have to be betrayed. He's going to have to be ultimately killed. And in that moment, yes, Peter pulls him aside and rebukes him. Because in that moment, Peter's confession became Peter's confusion. Because in that moment, as Jesus shared that information, Jesus leaves behind some very cherished traditions and expectations of the people. Jesus points in a particular direction to his cross. And it didn't match up with Peter's or any of the other disciples' ideas of what Messiah, what Christ should be. For you see, just with the disciples, even in our day as Christ followers, our mind gets set on earthly things. Our mind gets set on human ideals of who we think Jesus should be, who we think God should be, what we think the church should be, how we should act as those people. Sometimes we simply repeat what others are saying. And in the Lutheran Church, that's very easy because we go through not only scripture memory, but we also memorize Luther's small catechism. What does this mean? And so sometimes our faith is just a simple repetition of what others are saying. Also within the church, there are sometimes we seek alliances. We want people of like-mindedness because we want them to agree with what we say, because if they do, then we must be right. And even more than alliances, we want allegiances, because if it's an allegiance, then we must be the one in the power position. And so in that position, we like to steer the mission and ministry in the direction we want it to go. Because what happens in our human ideal is we are convinced. In fact, I'll even point at myself. I am convinced of the church that I want. And you are convinced of the church that you want. But too often in this thinking, what we end up doing is we get in the way of the God that we need. That's the first take. Next, take two.